I was again Shaka Hislop, honorary president of Show Racism the Red Card, in what has been a hastily put together podcast, kind of given everything that we've witnessed in the UK of late, how it's impacted communities of color, how it's impacted minorities up and down the breadth of the United Kingdom. We reflect on the government response and indeed on football's response, and what can our response be in terms of organizations and the work that we do. I'm delighted to be joined by Shaista Aziz of the Three Hijabs to speak about her own personal experience, how it's impacted her, where she thinks the government and institutions got things wrong, how they can put it right, and how we can motivate them in doing that. I'm also joined by a former teammate of mine, very good friend of mine, Trevor Sinclair. I know firsthand the work that Trevor continues to do in communities across the United Kingdom, how he's used his platform as a footballer to advocate for anti-racism and equality. Thank you both for joining me here today. I'm just going to jump right in at the deep end here. And Shaista, I'm going to start with you. Talk to me about your own personal experience, given, I guess, the sparking incident, how it was portrayed in the media, how it was taken advantage of by misinformation on social media, and how that kind of impacted you personally and your family.
Thanks, Shaka, for inviting me on. And first of all, I just want to thank Show Racism the Red Card for showing solidarity in this way and making sure this podcast happens. And also just to say it's a genuine honour to be here with both you brothers, heroes of mine, Trevor Sinclair and Shaka Hislop. So thank you so much. It has been, Shaka, an utterly horrific 10 days. And let's be clear, this is not about 10 days. This has been in the making for decades and decades. But I just want to start by saying that it's been a terrifying time for many people across the country, but specifically for British Muslims, for migrants, refugees, for our Black brothers and sisters, for anyone who's a minority. We've heard these horrific stories of people having a self-imposed lockdown, not going out, feeling too scared to go about their daily lives. And, you know, I'm the proud daughter of immigrants. My parents came here from Pakistan. They were invited to come here by the British state to rebuild this country after World War II, as many of our parents' generation were. And I grew up hearing these stories, and I also grew up in the shadow of what was then the National Front. And being terrified of their violence. And one of my earliest memories actually is of my late beloved dad being slashed with a knife by a fascist on the streets of our country, in fact the city I live in, which is Oxford, and you know, seeing the aftermath of that. And I thought I'd made this up, but many years later, as a young adult, I checked in with my parents and said, did I invent that? And they said, no, you didn't. They said, this is what happened. So I start there because I think there are some people in our country who want to think that these last 10 days of fascist, far-right, racist, Islamophobic violence kind of happened and now it's over with and we can all get back to summer. Well, no, we can't. We have to be really aware of how we've got here. And, you know, there are people and communities up across the country who have not left their homes. I've not left my home. There was no far-right violence in my city. However, I didn't feel safe to leave my home because my mum, who I'm a carer for, and my aunties and uncles live in the north of England, they were calling us and they were terrified and worried about how to stay safe. So this is the real implications. And also, Shaka, I'm an anti-racist activist. I have been my whole life. I'm one of the Three Hijabis. We work on anti-racism in football, which I'm sure we're going to get onto. But we had contact with more than 200 British Muslim women who were telling us that they were scared to have they might have their headscarves, their hijab pulled off. They were terrified of rumours of acid attacks circulating. And the point here is that racist violence is physical and it's psychological. It is designed to terrify us, as we know. It's designed to keep us off the streets. It's designed to stop us from going about our daily lives. And that, shamefully, is what has been happening. And the anecdote to that, of course, is the people who took to the streets, more than 25,000 of them, to say, no, we're not having this, having you marching in our cities. And all those brothers and sisters from across our diverse communities, protecting mosques, protecting, you know, their shops, their homes, you know, they're the real heroes here. And I think that they should be thanked by the government. And as yet, I don't see any thanks for them.
Shaista, I have to touch on something you said there, and you wrote about it in your Al Jazeera piece, and it was the threat of acid attacks. And as you make the point in your Al Jazeera piece, that as of right now, it's unsubstantiated acid attacks. But the trauma is still real. And I think that is one of the things that as people of color, as a Muslim woman, people looking in from the outside can't truly appreciate, or certainly you don't get that feeling in the press, that in the press everything is about, fact and not. But just the mere threat, the mere suggestion that an acid attack could have happened, I think is as traumatic, dare I say, as the very real threat that we've seen many videos of. Can you speak to how just that impacted you and the women that you speak with?
Yeah, so I agree with you. However, you say the press is about fact. Sadly, I think the press is not always about fact, Trevor, and I know, Shaka, and I know we're going to get onto that. The press is part of the problem here. The media, the mainstream media in our country, very sadly, has been amplified a lot of very racist and hateful rhetoric and terminology. By the way, not coming from people in the shadows, coming from mainstream politicians and so-called commentators. But to speak to your point, yes, absolutely. So in the work that we've been doing over the past 10 days, we've been advocating for all of us, specifically Muslim women, because often we are not heard or seen, and there are many, many assumptions made about us. And when it comes to this, these rumours and the fear of acid attack, thankfully and mercifully, we have no information that they have taken place, just to be very clear. There's no verified information out there. The fear of them, though, is enough to scare the living daylights out of women and to push them back in their homes. And this is a form of violence against women and girls. And indeed, what we've been asking for, the three hijabis, last week, we asked the government to acknowledge that gendered Islamophobia is a form of violence against women and girls, is a hate crime. We have just concluded the Olympics. Next up comes the Paralympics. In the Olympics, France is a country that has banned Muslim women from wearing the headscarf in all aspects of their life, including sport. So if you are a French female athlete and you choose to wear the headscarf, you cannot participate in playing football, you cannot participate in any sport. This is absolutely outrageous in 2024 that this is happening. Have we heard an outcry similar to what we had with the Qatar World Cup, where rightly so, people were asking about LGBTQI communities and the rights of LGBTQI siblings. They were asking about the rights of migrant workers. There's a big outcry that was missing in France, because Islamophobia is really mainstream and is sadly not recognized as a form of racism. And so we have a long way to really understand the implications of Islamophobia. And I think one of the most important things right now, apart from obviously supporting all communities who feel terrified and scared, is challenging Islamophobia. And it's really up to the rest of us to use this term. And I'm really pleased to see that in the Show Racism Red Card statement, the word Islamophobia is used, it is centered. And this is really important, because if we cannot call this what it is, then how are we going to solve the problem?
I'd like to come back to you on that Islamophobia discussion, Shaista. But before that, Trevor, I'd like to come to you and just ask about your own personal experience as to how you felt as in witnessing things unfold. And this coming from, by the way, a man who represented England at the highest level. But I'm sure the trauma was every bit as real for you as it was for everybody else.
It was. I mean, listen, I was mortified. And, I was saying earlier to a couple of friends, one of my first memories of racism was having a fight, being forced into this fight, getting beaten up, going home, my mum saying, who's hit me? Going back out to show who had been hitting me, and it was a man, and my mum fighting a man in the street because she didn't have an option to go to the police and say this is a racist, because she probably would have been arrested herself. He was an Irish immigrant, my mother. My father was a Jamaican immigrant. Both came to this country to work. And yeah, I mean, so to see that and experience what we experienced, as Shaista said before, with, the National Front in the 80s, and everything that came with that, being chased down the street, running for your life. I joke about it. That's why I'm so fast at running, but it literally is, because if I weren't fast at running and I was got caught off some of these gangs, I don't even want to think what would have happened to me. So then move forward 40 years, and you're looking at things unfolding on our screens, live, on our social media feeds. And I'm mortified, because not only are my 4 sons experiencing this, but my grandchildren. And to think that where we were in the 80s, and it was kind of a distant memory that you try and, you're traumatized by it, but you try and think, thank God them days have gone. And then seeing that unfold on our screens, on the news channels, on the social media feeds. Yeah, I mean, it was really upsetting. As what Shaista was saying earlier, I think it's an absolute brilliant thing that a lot of the public did, coming together in anti-racist marches in support of multiculturalism, and in support of all the minorities that make up this brilliant country, because we are a multicultural country. There's 18 million people in this country that have at least one parent that was born outside the UK. That's like a third of the population. We can't turn this around now. This is going to be the best way for me, is if we sort out our differences, appreciate different cultures, and try and get along. Because if we do that, I think we can become an absolute brilliant country. If we don't, and if we continue to let some of the institutions in our country behave in the way they have, when you're talking about the police force, institutionally racist. We talking earlier about Louise Casey's independent review. Straight away, Sir Mark Rowley came out, who's the head commissioner of the police force, came out and said, I don't accept that language. Unfortunately, that language was specifically chosen because that's what the review found in the police force. You look at the politicians' language around Islam and immigrants that are living in this country. I think it's appalling, and it's got to change, but it needs to change in the institution. It needs to change at the top, and that will trickle down. Unfortunately, because what we're seeing, the rhetoric that we're seeing in the institutions, in the media, is trickling down, and it's emboldening these fascist people and these racist people, that they can go out on the street and have these race riots. I'm pleased the way that Sir Keir Starmer has dealt with some of the perpetrators, and obviously giving out sentences, and people have gone to jail, rightly so. But I want him going after the people that organise these things, because I think that will send out a really strong message that if you're thinking about instigating any kind of racism or Islamophobic riots or marches or whatever you want to call them, thugs really getting together and causing havoc in our streets, that will send a clearer message that that's not accepted, and should never have been, really. Because you look back to when immigrants first started arriving, especially with the Windrush after the Second World War, and my biggest complaint would be, why did the institutions then not champion these immigrants? Because these immigrants were coming for a cry of help from the British government to come and help rebuild this country after the Second World War. They should have been championed and received like heroes, but they weren't. And the racism that they had to deal with for the next, since then, but especially for the decade after decade, until Harold Wilson brought in the Race Act, which made it illegal, which didn't stop it because it wasn't enforced by the police, but it was telling good-minded people, you shouldn't do this because it's not acceptable.
Shaista, Trevor touched on a lot there. Let me just ask, what can the social media companies do? How can they change? How can they be policed to avoid, I repeat, because they've played such a pivotal role in what we've seen unfold on our streets?
I think the sort of key kind of takeaway here is that they won't change, Shaka. They're not interested in changing. They have to be made to change. These are media companies. They deny they're media companies. They say that they're platforms and they're not media companies. A lot of this is because, they want to avoid the rules around taxation and things like that. The fact of the matter is, these are now massive, huge, influential companies. They are media companies, and the law needs to make them accept that they are, and then apply the same stringent rules that are applied to mainstream media in this country. We do have the bodies that are, in place, like Ofcom and others that are supposed to regulate our media. I mean, if we look at the past track record over the last sort of 10 years or so, holding media organizations to account for amplifying the voices of racists and far-right people and extremists is not a very good track record. There's been very few examples that you can look at where they have held people to account. I think that the amplification of this racist ideology has definitely taken all of this to another sphere. Let's not forget we've got the US election coming up in November. Already it's been reported in our own country here in the UK that there is evidence that Russian elements were involved in creating the online disinformation that there was then used as an excuse for people to go out and riot in racist riots in this country. So all of this, the genie is out of the bottle, as they say. So what do we need to do? We need to now get our politicians to act. I agree with what Trevor said. I think initially Keir Starmer's response has been good. It's a criminal justice response. He is a man who is well versed in the criminal justice system. He's a former public prosecutor, but now he needs to move a step further. Now he needs to get people around the table from these social media organizations and mainstream news as well. Let's not forget mainstream news. Last time when Donald Trump became president of the US, there was some research that showed that every single time he was interviewed by mainstream journalists in the US, CNN and others, his popularity ratings went through the roof. They treated him like a showbiz character. They treated him like an entertainment figure, as opposed to holding him to account. So I don't think that this is not solvable. I don't think this, we can't do anything about this. There's a lot we can do about this. And I also think it's important to emphasize that the average person in our country is disgusted by what they have seen, and they do not agree with this hatred of refugees and migrants and people of color and everybody else. And so they're looking for accountability, but the accountability has to come first from the government, and then they have to work with civil society and with everybody else who believes in the same thing to hold the perpetrators of violence like this to account. So we're talking about all the main media platforms. We're also talking about key figures like the likes of, inverted commas, Tommy Robinson and others who have been inciting this violence for a very long time, by the way. This is not the last 10 days, it's been going on for decades. So we need to see some robust action, and we also need to see proper education programs. And I know Show Racism Red Card does a lot of education work, particularly in schools. It starts very young. We need to educate people about what anti-racism is, and also what this country's history is. This country's history is based on immigration. It is based on colonialism. It is based on many things that need to be talked about, that are uncomfortable things often, but we need to find ways to have compassionate conversations that enable us to work out how to move forward.
Shaista, why were the media so slow in labeling these riots as Islamophobic?
Because, Shaka, the media overwhelmingly has been amplifying these stories for decades. The mainstreaming of Islamophobia, it's been like a wildfire. On September the 11th, we're a few weeks away, is a devastating anniversary of 9/11. I think we're now 24 years in. In that time, just look at what has happened. Look at the catastrophic wars that have devastated large parts of the Middle East. Look at the huge numbers of refugees that have been created, who have been fleeing for their lives, and look at how they're being treated overwhelmingly in Western countries. To be clear, the vast majority of refugees are nowhere near Europe. They are around the countries bordering where they are fleeing. Utter chaos has been created by foreign policy, the UK's foreign policy and other countries' foreign policy. And we are in the midst of a climate crisis. Again, people deny that it's happening. So the numbers of refugees that are going to be created based on the climate crisis is going to increase as well. So we need to have a media that is accountable and that actually wants to focus on facts, accuracy and facts. And I think what's going on at the moment is someone will come on the airwaves and say it's raining outside, and you'll look out the window and think, it's not raining, it's a bright sunny day. But the journalists and the editors won't go, sorry, it's not raining, it's actually a bright sunny day. In the name of so-called balance and nonsense that we need to take these people on. And in fact, when they are taken on, Shaka, they have nothing to say. They have nothing to say. And so, the journalists have been missing in action in large numbers, and they need to do their job properly. And if they don't start doing their job properly, then I think what we're going to see is a further mainstreaming of this hatred and violence, online violence, offline violence, as we've seen in the US. So we have to learn lessons from other countries, and we have to learn them fast.
As Shaista points out, Trevor, there is a upcoming general election here in the US later this year. The UK, of course, just had theirs, and a new government was installed. How much of that kind of political rhetoric and political, let's be honest, posturing has fed into what you've seen from the far right in terms of, again, this both siding of so many issues around what you would think is just a basic morality?
Yeah, for me, listen, it's all connected. There's no denying that, and I think causing this kind of rift between different cultures is what I feel they need to be able to try and get in office. And by causing this rift between different cultures, they're getting a lot of people who are not really well educated on their side in a patriotic kind of way, without them actually knowing the details on why they are even supporting this politician. So for me, it's all connected. But just going back to, we touched on it earlier a little bit about football before we started the podcast, and I just wanted to touch base with what's going on with the Premier League, because obviously they have a no racism, no room for racism slogan. Obviously, we've seen players before games taking the knee. We've seen lots of different things that they've been involved with. But when the country is in a situation like it's in, 7 days away from the start of the Premier League season, and the chief executive of the Premier League, Richard Masters, still yet to make a statement, I find that quite offensive. And I understand if you look at the demographic of fan bases, there's a lot. Obviously, it's massively outnumbered with probably 16 to 35, 40-year-old white men. But when you look at the pitch, and listen, the players on the pitch, I think it's about 40% are minorities. And if you look at, they've got families in this country. They are being personally affected by these riots. I'm sure players have said to their wives, to their kids, I've said to my kids, be careful. When they're going out, be careful. So it's affecting a lot of the players who are the assets. That's the asset of the Premier League, the quality of the players. 40% of them are multicultural. Why is Richard Masters sitting on his hands and not making a statement, opposing riots, and actually saying, if you're involved in these riots, we don't want to see you anywhere near football, full stop.
That's one of the most amazing things to me, kind of given the history of football, and in particular, British, if not English football. And I say this all the time, that football has this history, and going back to the 70s and the 80s, around the firms and pandering to the firms, you see it play out more now in mainstream Europe, where they talk about the ultras and the effect and influence that ultras have on footballing decisions that football clubs have today. This is not 70s or 80s. This is now. This is a pretty thuggish right-wing element of their fan bases that still have such a significant say in the running of so many top five European League football clubs. It's simply amazing to me. And that continues to be a concern, how those foundations around that thuggery, around firms, around violence, just hasn't seemed to have gone away. And that's a huge concern. Shaista, let me ask, in building on that, and we'll get to what football specifically can do, kind of given both Trevor and my own history. What is the next step in terms of institutional effort to not just stop the riots, but stop them from happening again?
So I think this is a really big and important question. And if the only response from the government is a criminal justice response, that's not going to stop anything like this happening again. There has to be a wide program that is put together by the government, and that has to be focused on inequality, on inequity. You know, we are now one of the most unequal countries in the whole of Europe, second only to Estonia, tiny Estonia. Why is it that this country, which has a lot of wealth, why is it that so many people are living in utter deprivation? They have no hope. They don't feel like, you know, their prospects for their life is going to change. Just to be very clear, this does not give people excuses to go out on the streets and start beating up brown and black people and trying to set fire to hotels where there are migrant and refugees. Absolutely nothing excuses that. And I don't buy into this media narrative about, you know, legitimate concerns. No, there's nothing legitimate about any of that fascist violence. And we have to focus and drill down on the issue of poverty, exclusion, and a lack of hope. You know, we've had 14 years of austerity that has devastated and gutted so many of our communities. You've got amazing people up and down this country. We've seen them on the streets mopping up, cleaning up, fixing walls, teachers, youth workers. You know, they're doing their work with no money, right? And they continue doing their work with no money because they are the real patriots in this country. They love this country and they love their communities, right? But we need to make sure that there is a proper program focused on ending child poverty. Why are food banks part and parcel now of the fabric of this country? It's absolutely outrageous how poverty has been mainstreamed. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. I'll be frank with you, Shaka, and say I'm not convinced that the people in power have the ability to fix all of this. No, they don't. They need to work with all of us. We need to have a collective response to this, from sports, culture, to the average person on the street. You know, we need to come together because ultimately we are the people who are going to fix this. We can't just wait for those in power who created the mess that we're in through their, you know, mainstreaming of hatred, as we've already talked about. So I think all of those things are really essential. And I know you're going to focus on football in a bit, but I agree with everything Trevor said. And alongside protecting the players, and the players have no protection, I'm devastated at how black players have been treated in this country, particularly those who play for the England team. It's shameful. But what about those people who live around football clubs? Traditionally, football clubs are multiracial neighbourhoods. When I grew up, we were told not to go out on the streets when football was on. Okay, that's how my uncles and dads and mums, the messages we got. What about those people on public transport who want to go about their day-to-day business while they're being attacked or, you know, being racially abused by so-called football fans? Football has been aware of this problem, as you've said, from the 70s onwards. It has not done enough, right? And I also salute you, Trevor, for speaking the absolute truth there. Where is the Premier League? Why have they said nothing? What reassurances are they going to give the communities around football stadium? You know, football is not a game, an entity by itself. It is a multi-billion-pound industry. The Premier League is a leading part of Britain's culture. It goes around the world, as we know. And we need the Premier League in particular to say very clearly to introduce its football banning orders, and it will not tolerate any form of racism. And up until now, they're silent.
And pending that statement from the Premier League, let's assume it comes at some point. Trevor, I'll put this to you. What can football do beyond that to, again, contribute to making sure its fan bases, its communities, not just represented, but respected? What can football do in its own effort to make sure that we don't see these types of race riots, this Islamophobic riots playing out on our streets again?
But I think there's got to be strict warning with this statement. There's got to be strict warning that they won't tolerate anything. As Shaista just said there, any racism, any Islamophobia, any chanting of Tommy Robinson, it's got to be banned. And if they are seen to do that, I think they need to quickly and be strong with that. And I just feel the messaging prior to the start of the Premier League. Remember, the lens of the world is on the Premier League. It's the most popular league in the world from a fan base. Different countries buy the rights for hundreds of millions of pounds. So the lens of the world is on football, and for football to be quiet as it has been, because don't get me wrong, the world's looking at England the UK at the moment. And, you know, I've got friends abroad in Muslim countries, friends abroad in the US, all over Europe. They're horrified by what's happening. They cannot believe what they're seeing. So tragically, this is very damaging for the UK anyway. But then talking about immigration, we had 1.2 million people come to this country last year. About just over 500,000 emigrated away. 200,000 of the people that came in were students that generate £41 billion for our economy. You know, and a lot of the people that are coming are health and care workers who we need, because we're decimated in that area because of after COVID. Many people decided that they'd had enough. So we need these to come to this country. There's a tiny minority of people that are coming across on boats because they have no legal route into this country. There's no legal route for them to go through administration and apply to live in this country. So they're desperate, and that's why they come on boats. It's like 30,000, 40,000. It's not even a big figure compared to the amount of people that are coming to this country anyway. So I think they need to take the spotlight off people that are risking their lives to come across in boats, because many people do die and perish on them journeys. But I think that should tell people how desperate these individuals and families are to even try and get on a boat to come to this country, because the way that we are treating them, and you know, I'm a son of 2 immigrants that came to this country. I've been very blessed to be able to play for my country, very honoured to play for England. But what I'm seeing in the media, what I'm seeing, the messaging that I'm seeing from politicians, yeah, it's really, really discouraging. But going back to sport, we need to show strong resilience against these thugs. So far, I'm still waiting from this message, but I'm just hoping that Richard Masters steps up and makes this speech.
A couple of things there. First of all, I think there's a desperate need for the truth to be told, and you touched on it there, Trevor, about immigrants and immigration and the economic impact it has on countries, because it's being spun and told in a way that continues to dehumanize and demonize people of color. Secondly, I think there needs to be some kind of dog whistle law about, you know, you talk about the name Tommy Robinson, and this is a discussion that we had, Trev. Well, some will argue, well, it's just the name, a man's name. As a person of color, if somebody's chanting Tommy Robinson in my face, I understand what they're saying. I understand the dog whistle to it. So there needs to be some kind of effort towards that. I will say, though, that for as disturbing, as traumatizing, as impacting as the riots were, I find such joy in the response of the anti-racist efforts in supporting our communities of color, recognizing that truth. Shaista, just speak about the response. Speak about how all communities, people of all ethnicities and religions came together in an effort to drown out the noise of the far right.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Shaka. We need to focus on that as well. And, you know, more than 25,000 people took to the streets last Wednesday. There were rumours and online information circulating that these fascists were planning to go to major streets and towns across the country. So the people came out and said, no, you're not coming here. And, you know, they chanted, refugees are welcome. They stood in solidarity with each other. We've also seen an imam in Liverpool, for example, opening up the mosque and inviting people who have sadly been manipulated to believe these hateful ideologies to come in and break bread with them and sit down and find out what Muslims are really about, and let's have a conversation. And that's you know, that those are the kinds of things that have been going on. And I think that we do need to focus on those stories, and we need to focus on the hope and the solidarity, because it's going to come from the people, as it always has throughout history. When hateful extremist ideologies have been torn down, it's the people, not those in power, responsible for doing that. And this is why we need the people's game, football, the beautiful game, to show that it is going to stand with those right-minded, decent people who are not having this. And this is why it's so important that this game that we love steps up. And if it's not going to step up now, then when is it going to step up? That's the question we have to ask. But there's a lot of solidarity and hope. And there's also lots of people now wondering what more they can do. But I do have to say to you both, and I'm very aware that you're both black men, and I don't need to say this to my black brothers, but only a few years ago we had Black Lives Matter, and there was a galvanizing and a movement. And when our England team took the knee, look at the disgrace that they were met by, not only by the government of the day, but other racists. So every few years, there is a raising of consciousness around racism, and then it evaporates, and then we come back together, and then it evaporates. We cannot allow this moment to evaporate. We need to now keep our foot on the gas pedal, and we need to ask and indeed demand accountability from football, from other sectors across the country to step up, because what we have seen has been devastating. We cannot have a repeat of it. And it's not just in our country, in France, in the US, in multiple countries across Europe. The far-right threat has been elevated. And I do think that these hateful figures, you named Tommy Robinson, there's others, they must be dealt with by the law. The law, there's plenty of evidence out there that shows what these people have been doing with the kind of hatred they're doing. They need to be arrested, and they need to be dealt. I do think there's a difference between people who might be a little bit lost and never had contact with black people or brown people. I don't know where they've been living. This is the most multiracial country in the world. Or they've been eating, actually, more importantly. If you don't have contact with black and brown people, what have they been eating? You cannot be living off beige food forever. What is going on, right? We need to bring people together, and we need to create more spaces where that's possible, because our community centres are being shut down. There's no community spaces left, in lots of these towns and cities. So one of them was burnt down, sadly, in these disgraceful riots. So we also need to go out of our way to extend the hand of friendship and to build in real life, because a lot of life has gone online, and that's not where real life happens. So we need all of that, but we need leadership. We need leadership, real leadership that is not going to appease the extremists, the far right, or any other form of extremists, that is going to actually deal with the multiple issues that we need to deal with.
And quickly, Trev, we saw football deal with its own issues, its own episode 3 years ago after the Euros and the defacing of the Marcus Rashford mural, and how the community came together there to use Shaista's phrase, how can football keep its foot on the gas pedal?
Well, listen, I think Show Racing Red Card, obviously yourself, Shaka, has a lot of it with football clubs throughout the country and the UK. I think we need to push that hard. I think we continued the messaging from clubs, from the different bosses, so the Premier League, the EFL, all the bosses need to come together and sing off the same hymn sheet to all the fans that we are one country. We're together. We're full of different cultures from all over the world, and we've got to come together. And I think when you get that, and when you feel that you're in an environment where everyone's pulling in the same direction, amazing things happen. At the moment, we've got these fascists now trying to cause upset. We have to defeat them. And the messaging from these clubs, individual clubs, from the different institutions, from all the way through. I mean, I think from the politicians all the way down through different institutions throughout the country, I think we've got to have the same messaging. And if that is the message that everyone's hearing, surely people will think, you know what, we need to get along. Because at the moment, we're not seeing enough of that.
Yeah, and I also have to say that I really give respect to Middlesbrough Football Club coming out immediately and saying this is not benefit. There needs to be an actual response from the FA and also from the Premier League. And in fact, before I came to join you for this podcast, I actually wrote to the FA to ask them if their asylum and refugee network is still running. I used to be part of it. We used to get amazing updates. The north of England in particular doing phenomenal, really powerful and humane work with people who have been labelled as refugees and migrants, whose humanity is being dehumanised. So football does individually, I think, do great work, and what we need is leadership from the people who run the game to actually speak with one clear voice, because that's where the
governing bodies, 100%.
It's when the night is at its darkest that the candle shines at its brightest, and I think that's what we've seen over recent days. So we've got to continue to amplify those individual lights. We've got to continue to try to find that silver lining. I say this to you and to all our sisters and brothers of Islam. I hope that you too can find solace, can find that silver lining through these clouds. We will be better for it, despite how it may feel right now. So until we meet again, Shaista, Trevor, please be safe and continue shining as brightly as you ever have.
Cheers, Shaka.
Thank you.